Māori tribal groups have lived in the great forests of Terawa, the Waitakaris, for centuries. According to legend, Harawa, god of the west wind, went in search of his wife who had gone missing. He found her basking in a beautiful valley in the rays of the sun. That valley became known as Oratia, the place of the long lingering sun.
Do you have any Māori history or anything that you might want to share with us?
This land was a fish. It was hooked up by Maui. And the first kaitiaki he left here were Ngāti Kui. From across the deep came Tutumaya with a new intelligence. And they mingled with Ngāti Kui. And then from across the deep came Omaiwa with new intelligence. And then they mingled with the people. And then from across the deep came Ngaririki. And so our history with this land starts with Maui fishing up the land out of the sea. So this is a very unique piece of land, and then this valley in the centre of that, this warm sunshine valley, Oratia, is a special place in it. Now, Oratia, this valley, leads us into the Waitakaris, the Waunui a Tiriwa, the forests of Tiriwa. Now, Tiriwa was the Merlin of these parts. He was our greatest magician. And so the people who were here before us had magic. They had fair skin, they had light-coloured hair, but they were sensitive to the sun. And so they couldn't walk about in the bright light of day like this. So they stayed in the forest, deep in the forest. And they would only conduct their business at night. And so when we first arrived, we never met them. We didn't see them, because they only came out at night. But we'd see footprints, or we'd see the trace of a fishing net or something like that. And so we became aware there were other people here. And these other people are called the Tūrehu. Some people call them the Patupaerehe, but the Tūrehu. And the Tūrehu had magic. And Tiriwa, he was a Tūrehu.
Kia ora Ken, I'm Olivia. And today I'm going to be asking you a few questions about your childhood and your experience in this school.
Where my life started, I was born in Whangarei, and before I was 1 year old, both my mother and my father had passed away. I must have been too much of a worry for them, I think. I was the youngest one of a family of 5, and my aunt who lived in Oratia promised my mother that she would look after the whole family. We eventually all moved to Oratia, to a farm in Parker Road, and that's where I grew up.
What can you tell us about the lives of Edwin and Rhoda Gash?
Edwin was sick with tuberculosis, and his doctor recommended that he move to the Waitakaris, and where there was plenty of fresh air. He didn't give him very long to live, but however he took that advice and he moved to Waiatarua. I don't think there was a house there when he moved there, so he built some accommodation, like a small shed and a tent, and that's where they lived for a while. Edwin survived for another 20 years when he wasn't given that long to live by the doctor. And here's the house that eventually was built at Waiatarua by my grandfather and grandmother. And this is the transport that they used to use to pick up the guests who were coming to the boarding house, they would go down with this horse and wagon to pick them up from the station.
Rhoda and Edwin Gash moved to Nihotupu in 1905 and lived in a tent and an iron shack. Their daughters Mavis and Ivy had to walk 6 kilometres down a steep clay road to school every day. Mr. Hosking, the headmaster, used to hold up a newspaper to read in class with a tiny hole to watch the children. "And what do you think you're doing?" he would bellow if anyone misbehaved.
This photo of the school was taken in 1910, but some of the girls are wearing big sun hats, as you will notice. And this is another one of the whole school. That was in 1945, and that's the total number of people that were at the school at that time. One of the things that Mr. Tidmarsh felt that the pupils should do was to wash his motor car. I wasn't sure that that's what we were coming to school for, to do the car washing, but however, he would appoint people to do that, and he wasn't happy, I don't think, if they didn't do it well.
What's this speck of dirt doing on my car?
"But sir, I've been polishing for an hour."
Come back here, boy.
"I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir."
I'll be back with my cane.
You better hurry up with that. I don't want to be late to school again.
Oh, don't worry, we've got plenty of time. We can always run.
Well, I don't want to get dirty.
We can take a shortcut through the forest.
Well, I don't want to snag my smock.
Then lift it up.
I got told off by the teacher yesterday before being 5 minutes late.
Well, then if we didn't dawdle.
Well, I'm going to breakfast because I'm hungry.
Good morning, Mother.
Good morning, girls. Come and have some breakfast.
What's for breakfast?
I've got bread and marmalade, and you can have an apple. After you've finished your breakfast, collect your books and get ready for school. And by the way, don't forget to fetch some apples for supper. I'll make apple crumble.
That's my favourite.
The West Coast Road has run past the school gates for 100 years. The logging track could get so muddy in winter that the wagons got hopelessly stuck for days. Even after it was metalled, it could be hard to navigate. Mr. Chanteloup was driving to Piha in the 1920s when his petrol tank was torn right off his car by the ruts on the road.
The first Oratia post office was part of a small store run by Joe Wild near to the school. Children would often collect their mail during the lunch break along with a penny worth of sweets. In those days, 1 penny could also buy a bag of potatoes, a small pack of tea, or half a bag of flour.
Well, I was very lucky and I came to this school, Oratia School. And I started in 1977 in room 2 the same room 2 that's over there with Mrs. Blacker. And this is a picture of our class, our new entrant class. And can you spot me there somewhere? And I remember lots of my teachers when I was here, and one that I remember the most was Mrs. Rogers. And this is our netball team. And look, this is our Oratia shoot, and you know what? We use the same uniform for our kapa haka. So we used to share the netball and kapa haka uniforms. Now, I was really lucky. When I was in Standard 4, which is year 6, we had our 100 years celebration here at Oratia. Oratia School began in 1882, and in 1982 was our 100 years. And we fundraised for the swimming pool, which we opened at the celebration. And here's the pool, and here's me. We were the first kids, aren't we lucky? The first kids here to get into the pool. I was Miss Joyce, who was the school teacher in the pageant. She was the teacher here in 1920, and so I was this very strict teacher. It was good fun.
What is under the rock?
This is where the time capsule is. The time capsule is made of copper so that it can last long under there. This is where the goodies are that have been kept for the next 100 years. They put in a couple of books, a couple of library books. There was some money. There was a VHF video of the parade and all the festivities.
Why was the time capsule buried?
I guess by burying this time capsule we can get a little snapshot of what it was like in time gone by.
Back in 2007, it was 125 years since Oratia School had been in this place, so we decided that we would do a big celebration in which we did a number of different things. One, we fundraised for a sculpture, which is the apple tree sculpture that you see on the corner of West Coast and Shore Road. The sculptor was a man called Toby Twiss, whose father is also a famous sculptor. All the students showing in the sculpture span the 125 years, so you'll see people dressed in Victorian clothing, but then you'll see more modern day students or pupils, and you'll see somebody with a broken arm, because there's always someone with a broken arm in a school photo. So that's a really special sculpture which will, survive forever at the school. Another thing the sculptor did was to make some little commemorative brooches, and we also had a little wee badge that people who registered for the 125th got to wear.
Do you have any stories that you might want to tell?
Well, I brought this along, Darcy, to show you, because we were living in Curry Loop Road, and my father was sporty. You were talking about sport. Anyway, he played for the equivalent of the Auckland Blues, and this is over 100 years old, because the team he played in then was called Auckland Rugby Union. There wasn't an Auckland Blues, and he played for the team. And if you look at the cap, it actually says 1928, and I'm sure the boys will probably think that was a bit funny. When they played for the team in the season, they got a little cap to wear like this, and this one had a tassel on it. So we all played quite a bit of sport growing up.
What were some childhood memories that you have encountered?
We used to have a pet day, and people used to bring all their pets. So you used to have guinea pigs arriving, and you had baby calves, and you had dogs, and we had a dog called Barney that we thought we'd put in the pet show. So we brought Barney down, and Barney was a big dog and used to wave his tail madly. So we thought, we'll put him in the happiest dog. There was a competition. You could have the saddest dog, the happiest dog. So everybody brought their pets. So we brought Barney. Now guess what happened? The vet was the judge. So we all lined up for the happiest dog, and Barney had got an injection just the last week at the vet. And he took one look at the vet, and he sat on his tail, and he wouldn't wag it at all. So that was the end of our happiest dog.
One of the earliest memories was that we lived up on Forest Hill Road and we could ride our horses down sometimes when we wanted to, and we would leave them in Regisa, which is apple orchard next to the shop. We were allowed, and they'd just stay there all day eating apples.
Can you tell us what the murder house was?
The murder house! Oh yeah, we were just talking about that before. The murder house.
The murder house. Can you explain what it is before you?
The dental clinic.
Yeah. Right. And why was it called the murder house?
Well, because nobody likes going to the dentist.
Dentistry has come a long way, let's put it that way.
And I remember the thing is that you would see the notebook with the big black bulldog clip on it. Somebody would come walking, some other child, traumatised child would come walking into the class and it would have someone's name on it. And you were thinking, is it going to be me? Is it my turn to go to the murder house? So yeah, nobody liked the notebook with the bulldog clip on it.
Done for a living?
I am currently a scientist, so I work for a company called AgResearch, which is one of the Crown Research Institutes. And AgResearch is about science for farmers, so doing the best science we can to help make New Zealand's farms the best they can be.
Do you remember any hobbies or fashion that you enjoy doing?
Well, I do actually. I have brought an exhibit, so it's a combination of hobby and fashion. So this is a beanie that I knitted. So at high school, when I learnt to knit when I was at primary school, I think. And at high school I still knitted, and many of my friends found it a little bit unusual. They preferred things like cricket and rugby, but I like to knit. And so I like to make my own beanies. So this one is one I made for you recently. And I bought this from a lady at this Oratia Settlers Hall at a market, and she had got it from a rare breed of sheep in one of the outer islands off Auckland. And so this is its natural colour, and it's nice and springy wool, and yeah, it's just something I like doing.
And when I was young, there wasn't really a lot of Māori people in Henderson. And between here and Henderson High, it was still mainly orchards in those days. And so walking from there to here was, especially this time of the year, was just a feast. We just had so much yummy, juicy fruit, grapes. We learnt where all of the most juicy grapes were, the sweetest grapes, the sweetest oranges, the best apples, the juiciest pears, kiwi fruit. There wasn't much kiwi fruit there. There was only one vine that the Antanoviches had that I knew of, but we really liked the kiwi fruit. We used to call them Chinese gooseberries.
Was there anything to do with Māori culture that was in your school?
There was a teacher called David Hare, and he lived along the road, and he started the Oratia Folk Museum. He taught real history, and one of the things he taught about was Te Rauparaha, and so he wrote a play about Te Rauparaha, and I was in the play. I played Te Rauparaha, and the play went down really well with the school because it was real Māori history, and we didn't have any at school in those days. And the play went down so well, he thought he'd make a film. And so we went down in the bush behind the school, and he had a camera, and there was a scene where I came out and I confronted all of the settlers, and I was on my own. And the settlers started getting a little bit aggressive. And then at a certain cue, all of the other Māori kids would come out of the bush and ambush all of the settlers. And so he started filming, he called action, I came out, we had our dialogue, I gave my cue, and none of the other Māori kids came out of the bush. And so I did my cue again, still no one came out of the bush. And then he called cut, and we went and had a look in the bush, and all the other Māori kids had gone home. So we never got to make the film.
Do you know why they went home?
They thought it was funny because they were hiding in the bush, and someone said, "Hey, stay calm. They won't notice." And so everybody disappeared in the bush.
Tony, Nick and George used to hide in the bamboo groves behind their house with sheets over their heads. When their local children walked by, they'd jump out screaming. The next day, the kids all complained the yard was haunted. But there's no such thing as ghosts in Oratia, insisted George.
My parents came from Croatia in the late 1930s. They went to the far north to seek their fortune, where they were to team up with some other Croatians and dig kauri gum. This is the kauri gum that they had to drain swamps and probe. After the water was gone, they had to probe with big long probes to dig the gum. It was very, very harsh conditions. At the time, they lived in a tin shanty with sugar bag floors and flour bags over the windows. Not long after, they upgraded to a tent, and that time they were able to buy a cow. By now, they had 2 children, Jack and Olga. In 1940, they decided to move to Auckland, where they were told that money grew on trees. They bought an 8-acre plot of land in Oratia on the West Coast Road. Now, with 4 children to care for, my dad had to cycle to Campbell Road, some 6 miles away, then catch a bus to Western Springs Quarry to earn enough money to buy vines and wire and grapes. My dad had earned enough money to be able to stay on the farm and make wine that was sold to the American sailors in the 1943-44 during the war years.
After the deluxe grapes had been processed, the stalks were taken out of the vats and scattered in the vineyard. Cows sometimes came along and ate the fermented stalks. Suddenly, their eyes would glaze over. At first they would stumble, then all fall over in a tipsy daze.
My early childhood memories revolve around the vineyard that my parents owned and our Croatian heritage. So my childhood memories at home was a lot of working on the vineyard, from tending the vines to picking the grapes and making the wine. It was a family affair. I had 3 brothers and sisters, and we had lots of fun. Our Croatian heritage involved lots and lots of family members, aunties, uncles, grandparents who lived next door, and we often got together for big gatherings and the Croatian specialty, which is a lamb on the spit.
What was your vineyard called?
My family vineyard was called Oratia Wines. Here's an example of a bottle of wine that we made. So Oratia Wines was directly next door to my grandparents' vineyard, which is the vineyard that my Uncle George has discussed. It was called Deluxe Wines, and you can still see the original house from the 1940s on that property.
On Sundays, Jackie drove to Cornwallis Beach with her family. They'd go fishing all day and catch sugar bags full of piper and snapper. They would swim, have a picnic on the beach, and come home all sunburnt. There was no sun cream in those days.
Has this garden been anything but a tropical garden?
No. In the beginning, when my dad and my mum bought this place, there was nothing here. It was a kind of rundown dairy farm. So the Davidsons were running cows on here, and there was an old cow shed. Pretty much no garden or trees apart from around the house. And my dad had gone to Massey University to study horticulture, and he wanted to grow unusual fruit trees. So he started off with tamarillos. He started lots of different fruit crops in New Zealand. He kicked off the Feijoa industry, macadamia industry, and then he did commercial bananas here. The kiwi fruit of this property were the first kiwi fruit to be exported out of Auckland. During the South America days, he also brought in all these unusual fruits which you will never have heard of probably. Cherimoya, lucuma, pepinos, all sorts of plants. So now with the tropical garden, what you see now is you don't really see many fruit, and that's because my dad sort of was so into plants he didn't stop at fruit. He started seeing palm trees. So now the way we see this garden is a really important resource for saving the special plants. Some of them are so rare, we've only got one in the whole country, and in some cases like there's a group of palms that the habitat's probably disappeared and they're only here, and we will be able to save the seed and grow them and send them back. So at the moment for a living we grow bamboo for privacy, because in Auckland there's a lot of trees getting cut down and a lot of big houses and apartments getting put up, and people have lost their privacy, so we're growing bamboo, which is the fastest growing plant on the planet. But what people don't realise is there's two kinds of bamboo. There's the bad running ones that go everywhere and become a weed, and then there's a different type that are clumping ones. So their whole root structure is completely different. So we only sell the well-behaved ones.
Is there a really funny story you can remember that happened here?
Yeah. When I was young, my parents bought an old hearse from Dargaville. My sister was so embarrassed to be dropped off at school in a hearse. So she would hide, but how could you hide? Because it was the hearse. But one day my dad used the hearse to pick up some chicken manure for the plants, and it was all steaming in the back, so it looked pretty weird.
When did you first start work?
As a potter? Do you mean as a potter?
Yeah.
About 1968. I was in London and I went to a night class and I started making pots there.
When did you move to Oratia?
I think that was about 1968. I bought a little shack of a house up in Cascade Avenue, and it really was a shack. It lasted about 6 years before we started falling through the floorboards, and quite literally the boards were that rotten that you had to watch where you walked. But the site was brilliant, and I knew that. We had views all out over Auckland. On a crisp day you could wake up in the morning and see Great Barrier, Little Barrier, and all the islands in the Gulf. It was a magic place, but it was very difficult to run a pottery up there. It was very, very steep hill, and the pottery was down the bottom of the hill, and the house was at the top with the wonderful view. all day long up and down the hill, so that's why we called it hillside pottery.
How's your business or work developed over the years?
Yes, it took off quite well and managed to support wife and family, although Rosie, my wife, is a potter as well, so it was a joint effort. And in those early years of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, we did quite well. We were happy, we were making pots here, and kids were playing cricket after school on the lawn out there. But then the imports started happening and sales certainly dropped, and that's when I took up pottery teaching. So I've done all sorts, but my main love is still making pots.
What kinds of toys did you play with when you were a child?
Very simple. You made your own. My father had a very good workshop and very good saws and chisels and woodworking tools. So I quite early on made my first kayak, and I used to go paddling the kayak out to Bean Rock and across to Rangitoto. And then a little bit later I made my first yacht, a P-class, and loved sailing that around the place.
What kinds of games did you play when you were a child?
Hooning around on our bicycles. There was a deserted orchard in the middle of those two roads, and we did bankings and tracks all through the trees, and we had timed runs around this dirt track that we'd made ourselves. Came home from school, had a cup of tea, grabbed a biscuit and took off, and the parents didn't see you till nightfall basically. It was a fairly loose childhood. No homework.
Did you have any pets?
One stage we used to farm the 10 acres next door, and I had 45 Angora goats. We were breeding Angora goats, and it was meant to be a nice way of making a bit of money, but it didn't go very well. And we've just got sheep, and they're just lawnmowers.
Can you tell us about your grandfather and his work as a gum digger?
Yeah, my grandfather came out at the start of the First World War. He landed on I think the day it started. He was like 14 years old then. And he ended up going up north to dig gum, up around Waipu and up even further north.
What did he do on the railways?
Well, he'd organise all the guys, and they'd have to do digging with picks and shovels and things like that, laying tracks. They'd live in camps on the side of the tracks till they got stuff done, and then moved in. As they finished, they moved in further into town.
When did he buy this orchard?
They bought this orchard in 1953. They came out here from town, and he had a billiard saloon before then.
What can you remember about working in the orchard as a boy?
Well, I used to do a lot of work in the holidays and that. We'd have to pick up prunings and cut blackberries and with slashes and things under the trees. There was always work to be done, cleaning everything up, and because a lot of my cousins used to come out and we'd all kind of have fun playing in the orchard as well.
How has the business changed over the years?
Yeah, in the old days we just used to send stuff for export, so we'd pick it and get it into pack it all up here and then send it off so it would go overseas or in the local market. But now everything we grow here we try and sell it here, so it's a bit more direct.
Two of the first European settlers, Thomas and Jane Parr, arrived in Auckland in 1843. In 1854, Thomas bought 536 acres in Oratia and Glen Eden for £243, 17 shillings and 6 pence. He named the estate Albion Vale. The estate produced vegetables, butter, fruit, and over 600 types of apples. From 1904, Wellington pippins
were canned and sent to Covent Garden in London. They were sold for 30 shillings a case. When did your husband family buy Albanville?
At the end of the First World War, the three Harry brothers bought it, yes. But David was so concerned about its value that he had it registered with the Historic Places Trust. So it has a covenant on it, a protection on it, both inside and outside, yes.
The one thing this property has got, as well as being repaired so that it's a family home, and it still is a family home, the whole family are here. He brought lots of cottages and sheds, and if he couldn't bring a shed here and he still needed a shed like the barn at the museum, he'd build it.
Well, I have to say most of them were built. Now, well, Dave was meticulous with this house of having it restored back to its original farmhouse.
How did you and David help to set up the folk museum?
Well, it was a community effort. David saw that it was going to be demolished, so he suggested that they give it to the people of Oratia, and which they did, the Sutherland family did, because David had played in the house when he was primary school with one of the Blackburn boys, and he thought it was a very good example of an early workers' cottage. The New Year picnic, it was something that the Pars had, and David found out about it. That's where it grew from, and it wasn't on a regular basis. It was depending on who and how we could have it, manage it.
Yes, because Dave used to get the steam engine down to the field, and then he'd have the steam engine chugging along to cook the mussels.
Mussels, sweet corn, yes.
Yes. And the children absolutely loved the steam engine with the little governor going round, and it was so much fun.
The whistle to blow.
And plus it was family picnics. But
Can you tell us a bit about this history of this building?
This building, the Oratia Folk Museum Cottage, has been saved from demolition, moved and restored as a good local example of a simple settler's cottage. The cottage is thought to have been built between 1855 and 1870 by either Mr. Parker or Terence Donnelly.
Can you tell us what he did for a living?
Very little is known about Mr. Parker, except he was an orchardist. He was said to have sold the cottage in the 1880s to venture off to the Australian goldfields. An Irish weaver turned soldier, Terence Donnelly, arrived in New Zealand in 1845 and decided to buy land in Parker Road after fighting in the New Zealand land wars.
What can we learn about life in Victorian times by looking at the objects around us?
Here at the Oratia Folk Museum we have a drying rack hung with flour sacks and long undies, a spinning wheel, the coal range for cooking, hot water for baths, and heating the house. And we have a tin bath, which you would fill up with the hot water from the coal range and most likely wash in this room. We have lots of china, and we have ceramic hot water bottles which you would fill with hot water. It's the only way you could keep warm in your bed in the winter.
What was this saw used for?
The cross-cut saw was used for cutting kauri for timber. They would transport the kauri logs by bullock teams, dragging tree trunks and logs to the pit saw camps. Sawyers would have a pit cut quite deeply for a man to stand in. They would put the kauri log over the pit. One man under the log would pull on the pit saw, and the other sawyer on the top of the log would pull the saw up, and that's how they made kauri logs into timber planks.
How was the wood used?
The wood was used for houses, shops, factories, warehouses, fences, sheds, churches, wharves and boats.
Where did this apple sorter come from and how is it used?
This apple sorter has come from the Gash family orchard up Parker Road. Rusty Gash has donated it to the museum, and they would run apples along this wood rail here at the top, and this turning device here would sort and grade the apples into these different bins, I assume for good quality to sell and cheaper ones for other uses.
Ever since the first European settlers arrived in Oratia, dances have played an important part in local social life. Over the years, locals have danced to many different styles of music. In the 1930s, the Winola Orchestra played banjos and tamburikas. The Oratia Swing Kings played big band swing and Dixieland in the 1940s. These days you can learn to dance the Zumba.
With the mosaic, which is here at school, which says Oratia My Valley, that's where I belong. Now, the story behind that mosaic is that that's part of the school song that hopefully all the children still know here today. Mrs. Hope, who was the teacher in room 1, and she basically designed and put together that mosaic along with students. So Rudy Sunday was the person who wrote that song, and he was a local man, and he and his wife were part of the folk club in Titirangi, and he wrote a lot of songs. So he was from Dalmatian descent, like a lot of the orchardists around here were. So Rudy wrote a lot of folk songs about the Dalmatians, but also living in the valley, and of course one of them became the school song, Oratia My Valley.
Springtime in the valley, blossoms on the vine, gentle springtime breezes in the rustling pines. Springtime in the valley, winter's left behind, time to sow and time to plant for the harvest time. Oratia My Valley, that's where I belong. Oratia My Valley, that's where I call home. Oratia My Valley, valley of my birth. Oratia My Valley, loveliest on earth. Summer in the valley, fruits are bursting forth, slowly ripening in the sun, fruits of the earth. Summer in the valley, harvest getting near, summer sun is shining down, blue skies overhead. Oratia My Valley, that's where I belong. Oratia My Valley, that's where I call home. Oratia My Valley, valley of my birth. Oratia My Valley. Autumn in the valley, harvest coming in.
What did you do on this project?
I did drawing about Oratia. We made an animation about the West Coast Road.
I helped with drawing some of the background and helped with taking the shots in the film.
I did boom holding, camera filming, listening to stuff, the sun light reflector, and other stuff.
We had one person working on the truck, one person working on the background, one person drawing a dinghy, and one person doing the characters. We did a story about kids dressing up as ghosts and scaring other people away.
What could have you done better?
Helped a lot more.
Tell me something you have learned.
How to do the onion skin.
1 second equals like 12 pictures in animation. What did you find hard?
Drawing the background and colouring it in, because that took a while.
Yeah. Hardest thing was probably the movement of all the characters, like when you were doing the film, trying to get them in the right spots. If you nudged it, it would look bad when you actually do the video. What did you enjoy most?
Probably just taking the pictures and moving the characters.